You know that feeling, right? Every developer does. You've written the code, you've triple-checked the logic, you've even confirmed the data is flowing in. Everything should be working, but it's not. Well, today we're putting on our detective hats and diving into a real head-scratcher, the case of the lying dashboard.
So here are the facts of the case, and they just don't add up. On one hand, you have a script that's doing its job perfectly, collecting new data every 60 seconds and pushing it to a database. But on the other hand, the app that's supposed to show that data, it's showing nothing. Absolutely nothing new.
And that's the central mystery we're going to solve today. I mean, if fresh data is constantly pouring into the system, why is the screen telling a completely different and frankly very old story? Let's follow the clues.
Now, the project at the very center of all this was a Pi Testnet monitor. Its whole job was pretty simple. Keep an eye on the health and status of the Pi blockchain's test network. Basically, give developers a live, up-to-the-minute dashboard.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Think of this as laying out the evidence at the scene of the crime. The tech stack is actually pretty modern, pretty standard stuff. You've got a Next.js app for the front end, hosted up on Vercel. That app talks to a Supabase database for its backend. And what's feeding that database? A simple cron job that's grabbing data from the Pi Testnet every single minute. Nothing here seems out of the ordinary, right?
So with that dashboard totally frozen, the debugging really began. And like any good detective, the developer started by checking out the most obvious suspects, trying to hunt down this, digital ghost in the machine.
The whole investigation was super methodical. First things first, check the cron job's authentication secret. And that actually led to a good find, a tiny but critical bug. A little stray new line character was completely breaking the authentication. Okay, fix that. Next suspect? Next.js itself. Could it be statically building the API routes? Basically taking a snapshot at build time and never updating? To rule that out, they forced the routes to be dynamic, which should guarantee they'd fetch fresh data on every single request.
And here is the big twist in our story. Each one of those fixes was a real bug that needed to be squashed. So progress was being made. But after all that work, the dashboard hadn't changed one bit. It was still stuck, showing the same old data, completely frozen. The frustration, I'm sure, was just off the charts.
This is the moment where everything changed. See, when your application is straight up lying to you, you just can't trust it anymore. The developer realized it was time to cut out the middleman and go straight to the source. It was time to make the database confess.
So the plan was simple. Use a direct REST API query to talk right to the Supabase database. No Next.js, no Vercel, no front-end code getting in the way. Just a raw, direct question to the database itself. Hey, what data are you really holding?
And this is where the case breaks wide open. The answer that came back was, well, shocking. The app, our main witness, had been swearing up and down for hours that there was only one single record in the database. But when we interrogated the source directly, the database told a completely different story. It didn't have one record, it had 6. The cron job had been working all along. 6, not 1, 6 records, all there, neatly collected, 1 per minute, exactly like it was supposed to. The database was perfect. It was telling the absolute truth. And that could only mean one thing. Something else, somewhere in the chain, was lying.
This quote, right from the developer's notes, just captures that breakthrough moment perfectly. It's the confirmation. The database is innocent. The data is correct. The investigation now has a brand new and very specific target. So who's the liar?
So, with the database cleared of all charges, there was really only one place left to look. That layer between the application and the database. It was finally time to unmask the true culprit behind our frozen dashboard.
And our culprit has a name: edge caching. Now, platforms like Vercel use this to make websites feel lightning fast. They basically store a copy of your site's data on servers all over the world, which is great for speed, but it has this hidden danger. If that cache doesn't get updated properly, it'll just keep serving up the same old stale copy, no matter how much the real data has changed behind the scenes.
And this table just perfectly illustrates the entire mystery. When the app made a request, boom, it was intercepted by Vercel's super aggressive cache, which happily handed back the only thing it knew about, that very first single record. But when the developer went straight to Supabase, there was no cache, no interceptor, just a direct line to the truth, all 6 records.
So after a pretty long and winding investigation, the case of the lying dashboard was finally closed. But, like any good detective story, it leaves us with some really important rules to remember for the future.
So what's the takeaway here? First, what you see on the screen isn't always what's really happening in the database. Second, when you're in doubt, you have to go directly to the source of truth to verify your data. And finally, you have to always be aware of these invisible layers. Things like caching, proxies, CDNs that sit between your code and your user. They are so often the source of the most baffling mysteries.
And that really leaves us with one last question to chew on. In the systems you build or the ones you use every single day, what are those invisible layers that are operating behind the scenes? What might be sitting between you and the absolute truth of your data?